Hours before the ceremony, a confidential document had circulated among senior royals. It appeared to contain nothing more than routine procession instructions until one handwritten amendment quietly removed Meghan from a privilege she had been promised. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors. The revised protocol sheet arrived shortly before the procession, passed discreetly between senior members of the household and those expected to take part. On the surface, it seemed harmless. It listed where each person would stand, the order in which they would enter, and the formal greetings expected as the family moved forward. Every detail had been controlled. Every gesture had been assigned. But beside Meghan's name, someone had added a handwritten instruction that changed the meaning of her presence entirely. She remained on the official list, yet the note described her as attending in a personal, rather than institutional capacity. The words were careful, almost polite, but their meaning was brutal. Meghan could stand beside Harry as his wife, but she would not be publicly treated as someone representing the crown. She could be present, yet still be denied the acknowledgement given to others around her. Harry knew nothing about the change. He had seen an earlier version of the arrangements and believed Meghan would receive the same formal courtesy as every other member of the family. That belief was exactly what made the amendment so dangerous. It allowed the palace to change the rules without warning him, while placing Meghan in a position where any visible reaction could be used against her. Anne noticed the addition almost immediately. She had followed royal protocol for most of her life, and she knew the difference between a long-standing rule and a last-minute political decision. She asked whether the instruction had come directly from the monarch. The palace official answering her did not say yes. Instead, he claimed the change reflected what was best for the institution and assured her that no public disagreement was expected. Anne was not asked to explain the decision. She was simply expected to carry it out. To her, obedience had always been tied to duty. Yet even she understood what ignoring Meghan would communicate. It would not look accidental. It would look deliberate. Still, she was told the order had been approved, and that refusing it could create a deeper crisis. Meghan discovered the truth by chance. An aide attempted to remove the revised page from a nearby table, but not before she saw her name and the handwritten words beside it. She understood immediately. She also understood what Harry would do if she told him. He might refuse to join the procession, and the palace would blame her for the fallout. So Meghan remained silent, carrying the knowledge alone as the ceremony approached. What she did not know was that the amendment had not come from the authority Anne believed she was obeying. Someone inside the household had used Anne's reputation for discipline as cover, turning her into the weapon that would deliver the insult. Anne believed she was defending royal order, but Harry's immediate intervention forced everyone to confront a more dangerous question. Who had changed the rules, and why had Meghan been singled out? Harry had been warned that one wrong movement could overshadow the entire ceremony. Yet the moment Anne passed Meghan, he abandoned his assigned position, crossed the invisible boundary between royal duty and personal loyalty, and demanded an acknowledgement in front of witnesses. The decision came before Meghan could stop him. Harry stepped away from his place with such speed that the people behind him were forced to slow down, breaking the rhythm the palace had worked so carefully to protect. For a ceremony built on control, even a single misplaced step felt like open defiance. But Harry was no longer thinking about order. He was thinking about the silence Anne had just used against his wife. He called to her in a calm voice, but the question carried enough force to freeze the moment. Had she forgotten someone? Anne stopped. She did not turn immediately. Those few seconds stretched with unbearable weight because everyone close enough to hear understood what Harry was really asking. This was not about a missed greeting. It was about whether Meghan could be ignored in public and expected to accept it without protest. Meghan leaned toward Harry and quietly urged him to return to his place. She already knew how the palace would describe the disruption. They would not call it protection. They would call it another scene, another breach, another problem connected to her name. But Harry refused to move. To step back now would mean accepting the message Anne's silence had sent. It would confirm that Meghan could be reduced, dismissed, and erased without consequence. Anne finally turned, her expression controlled but hard. Instead of acknowledging Meghan, she told Harry that a royal procession was not the place for personal arguments. His answer came without hesitation. The insult had been made in public, he said, so the correction could not be hidden in private. Farther ahead, William noticed the confrontation and immediately signaled to an aide, warning other family members not to approach. Senior staff began quietly urging the procession forward, attempting to disguise the pause as part of the ceremony. But the damage was already done. The silence had become a confrontation, and the confrontation was becoming a test of loyalty. Anne's restraint began to weaken. Harry was not only challenging her actions, he was questioning her belief that duty required obedience, even when the order itself was cruel. For the first time, doubt appeared beneath her discipline. Then, Harry noticed where she kept looking. A palace official stood nearby, watching without speaking. Anne glanced toward him once, then again, as though waiting for permission to change course. The official gave the smallest possible response, a firm signal to continue and not acknowledge Meghan. That single signal changed everything. Because Harry now knew Anne was not acting alone, and the person directing her had been standing close enough to watch Meghan's humiliation unfold. Harry followed Anne's gaze and recognized the advisor immediately. This was no ordinary member of staff, but a trusted guardian of royal image whose private warnings about Meghan had shaped palace decisions for years, and who now appeared to be controlling the confrontation. The advisor had built his influence around one promise: that ceremony would never be allowed to weaken under emotion. He protected rank, order, and the public appearance of unity with almost ruthless care. To him, every greeting carried meaning, every position confirmed status, and every exception risked opening a door the palace might never close again. For months, he had argued that Meghan's presence created what he called constitutional ambiguity. She was still Harry's wife, still tied to the family, yet no longer serving as a working royal. In his view, a formal acknowledgement during the procession could be interpreted as something more than courtesy. It could look like restoration. It could suggest that the palace had quietly returned authority it had never agreed to give back. So the revised protocol had been designed to send a colder message. Harry remained royal by birth. Meghan's place, however, depended on permission. Anne had been chosen because she was unlikely to soften the rule. Her discipline made her useful. Her reputation made the decision appear legitimate. But Harry now understood that she had not created the insult. She had been positioned to deliver it. As the procession remained stalled, Harry moved toward the advisor and demanded to know who had authorized the handwritten amendment. The answer came smoothly, almost rehearsed. It reflected, the advisor said, the collective view of the household. Harry knew those words. They were used when everyone had agreed to a consequence, but no one wanted their name attached to it. It was authority without ownership, punishment without a visible hand. Meghan quietly asked Harry to stop. Attention was already shifting toward them, and she knew the palace would later claim she had turned a formal ceremony into a personal battle. But Anne stayed close enough to hear what came next. The advisor suggested Meghan had been made aware of her reduced position before the event. Meghan denied it immediately. No formal warning had been given. No one had explained that she would be publicly ignored. The palace had expected her to understand the humiliation as it happened, then remain silent enough to protect everyone responsible. That denial changed Anne's expression. She had been told Meghan knew the terms. Now she began to see that crucial information had been withheld from her. Still, the advisor refused to retreat. Restoring the acknowledgement, he warned, would weaken the authority of the procession and make protocol appear negotiable under pressure. Harry's answer was final. "Correct the insult now," he said, or he and Meghan would leave together. Harry's threat placed the monarchy in an impossible position: allow him to walk away beside Meghan, or force Anne to reverse herself before the entire royal gathering. Anne had spent her life obeying rules others found unbearable, but when she realized the palace had hidden the truth from her, her anger shifted away from Meghan and toward the officials who had turned her sense of duty into a weapon. She demanded to see the full authorization behind the revised protocol. No more careful phrases. No more claims about the household's shared view. Anne wanted the document itself, the approval behind it, and the name of the person who had truly ordered Meghan's public exclusion. The advisor hesitated before producing the page. That hesitation told Anne almost as much as the paper did. There was no direct royal signature, no clear command from the monarch. Instead, the document carried approval marks from several members of the household, each one strong enough to suggest authority, but weak enough to deny responsibility later. Anne understood immediately. The decision may never have been presented clearly to the person in whose name it was being enforced. Her anger hardened. Her reputation for discipline had been used to give the order weight. Others had written the message, hidden behind procedure, and expected Anne to deliver it without question. They wanted her sense of duty, but not her judgment. They wanted her name attached to the consequence, while their own remained protected. Harry, still furious, accused her of choosing rules over family. Anne did not retreat. She told him she could defend tradition, but she would not defend a rule that had been deliberately misrepresented. That answer did not erase the insult, and Meghan knew it. Anne's anger at the palace did not automatically mean she understood Meghan's pain. So when Anne asked whether Meghan had known about the classification describing her presence as merely personal, Meghan answered carefully. She admitted she had seen part of the document before the procession. She had stayed silent because she feared Harry would refuse to take part, creating another public break the palace could blame on him. The confession wounded Harry in a different way. He was angry at the institution, but also shaken that Meghan believed she had to endure the humiliation alone to protect him. Anne turned on the advisor. Meghan had been trapped, she said. If she protested, she would be called disruptive. If she stayed silent, the insult would stand. The advisor insisted that emotional pressure could not decide ceremonial status. Anne's reply was merciless. Secret manipulation was not protocol. It was cowardice disguised as tradition. She appeared ready to turn back and acknowledge Meghan. Then, another senior royal approached, carrying a fresh instruction. The advisor was no longer claiming responsibility. The order, they said, had come from a far more powerful name. The conflict was no longer between Anne, Meghan, and Harry, because the name attached to the decision carried enough authority to silence the entire procession. When the source of the order was finally revealed, even Anne went silent. The decision had allegedly come from the highest level of the family, but the wording sounded less like a monarch's command and more like someone exploiting royal authority for a private purpose. A senior courtier stepped forward and claimed the revised treatment had been approved on behalf of the sovereign. The phrase carried weight, but it also created immediate doubt. It did not prove that the monarch had seen the handwritten amendment. It did not confirm that Meghan had been named. It only wrapped the decision in enough royal authority to make questioning it feel dangerous. Anne refused to accept the wording. She asked the courtier directly whether the sovereign had personally ordered her to ignore Meghan. The answer never came. Instead, the courtier said the ceremony had to reflect the present structure of the monarchy. It was a careful response, polished enough to sound official while avoiding the truth. Harry recognized the tactic immediately. The household was hiding behind the crown, using its power as a shield so no one could be held responsible. For Meghan, the cruelty was no longer only in the silence. It was in what that silence had become. A simple acknowledgement had been turned into a test of obedience, as though her dignity depended on whether she accepted being reduced without protest. She had not expected warmth, but she had not expected the palace to make humiliation part of the ceremony. William quietly joined the confrontation and asked whether the monarch had been told that Harry might leave. The courtier hesitated, then admitted the full consequences had never been presented. Officials had believed Harry would not risk disrupting the event. That admission exposed the palace's deepest mistake. They had expected Meghan to absorb the insult and Harry to remain in line. Anne accused the household of gambling with family unity to protect a controlled public image. William urged Harry not to leave, warning that his departure would become the only story and push the family further apart. Harry's reply was cold and clear. Staying without a correction would teach the palace that Meghan could be erased whenever it was useful. Anne offered one final compromise. She would return, acknowledge Meghan, and allow the procession to continue, but only if officials accepted that the earlier interruption had been procedural rather than personal. The courtier refused. Royal hierarchy, he said, could not be rewritten under pressure. That was when Meghan finally spoke. Quietly, but with enough force to change the entire argument, she revealed that Anne's silence was not the first effort to isolate her that day. Meghan's confession exposed a pattern far larger than one missing greeting, and suggested the palace had been preparing her humiliation long before Anne entered the procession. Meghan had remained silent through altered seating, restricted entrances, and missing invitations because she feared being accused of creating drama. But Anne's public rejection was the final piece of a hidden plan designed to reduce her presence without officially banning her. She began with the first change. Her arrival time had been moved at the last moment, separating her from the senior family members who were meant to enter together. Then, her access to a private reception was removed without explanation, even though Harry's invitation remained active. A formal name card linking her to the royal family had also been replaced with a simpler personal title, one that made her presence appear less official and easier to dismiss. There were other instructions, too. Meghan had been told not to approach certain senior royals unless they spoke to her first. Palace aides described each change as small, practical, and necessary. But now, spoken together, they formed something far more deliberate. This was not one misunderstanding. It was a system of isolation built piece by piece. Harry was stunned. He had been told the altered arrangements were meant to protect Meghan from press attention and reduce pressure around her appearance. The truth was the opposite. The palace had used the language of protection to hide a quiet removal of status. Meghan explained why she had kept it from him. She knew that if Harry understood the full plan, he might refuse to attend. And if he did, officials would say she had caused another break with the family. So, she had carried the burden alone, hoping the ceremony would pass without open conflict. Anne now saw the full design. Her silence in the procession had not been an isolated act. It was meant to become the final public confirmation that Meghan's place had been reduced. William demanded to know who had approved every alteration. The answer led back to the same advisor's office. The advisor defended the decisions, insisting they were needed to prevent confusion about Meghan's role. But Meghan challenged the contradiction with painful clarity. The palace had invited her because her presence supported the image of family unity, then removed every sign that she truly belonged. Harry's anger sharpened. They wanted Meghan visible enough to strengthen the monarchy, he said, but powerless enough to be ignored. For Anne, the danger now reached beyond one insult. She understood that palace systems had turned family members into tools against one another, hiding manipulation behind rank and duty. Continuing the procession would no longer mean preserving order. It would mean accepting the deception, and Anne had made her choice. For the first time that day, Harry was no longer the only royal ready to step out of line, and Anne's next move threatened to destroy the palace's carefully prepared illusion of unity. The procession had already begun moving again when Anne stopped, turned against the direction of the ceremony, and walked back toward Meghan. It was a simple movement, but inside the monarchy, it carried the force of an open rebellion. Senior aides quietly urged her to continue, but Anne ignored them. Royal processions were built to remove uncertainty. Every step had meaning, every pause risked exposure, and no one was expected to change direction once the ceremony had begun. Yet Anne did exactly that. She returned without waiting for approval from the advisor, the courtier, or anyone claiming to speak for the crown. Harry stood beside Meghan, unsure of what was coming. Anne might apologize. She might defend the order. She might even warn them both to fall back into place. The uncertainty made the moment more dangerous, because one wrong sentence could deepen the fracture beyond repair. Then, Anne formally acknowledged Meghan. She addressed her with the respect that had been withheld only moments earlier, correcting the insult in the same public space where it had been delivered. Meghan answered calmly. She did not smile in victory or use the moment to embarrass Anne. She understood that this was not yet peace. It was only the first visible crack in a much larger system. Anne turned to Harry and told him he had been right to intervene. But she also warned him that public defiance carried consequences the palace would not forget. Harry did not hesitate. Silence, he said, would have carried a greater cost for his marriage. Anne then made her position clear. She would not continue until the revised instruction was removed from the ceremonial record. William supported her, arguing that the monarchy could not claim dignity while protecting hidden rules and manufactured humiliation. The advisor pushed back. Removing the amendment now, he warned, would appear to reward Harry's confrontation and weaken the authority of the household. Anne's answer cut through every excuse. Leaving the words in place would prove that the crown allowed deception to be carried out in its name. The officials finally agreed to withdraw the language temporarily, though they insisted the decision would be reviewed once the ceremony ended. The procession resumed under a changed order, placing Harry and Meghan closer to Anne than originally planned. Publicly, it looked like unity had been restored. But the compromise was already turning into another trap. Before the procession had even finished, a private review had been scheduled to examine Anne's actions, Harry's disruption, and Meghan's status. Harry was not invited. The public crisis appeared contained, but behind palace doors. A far more dangerous confrontation was being prepared, one that would decide whether Anne's intervention protected Meghan or made her position even more vulnerable. By evening, the palace had transformed the procession incident into a question of discipline. Harry was accused of disrupting royal order, Anne of undermining authority, and Meghan of becoming the center of another crisis, yet the hidden document told a very different story. Senior royals and advisors gathered privately to decide who would carry the blame. Harry was initially excluded because officials claimed his emotional involvement made him unable to speak objectively. But Anne refused to enter the meeting without him. She had already been used once. She would not allow the palace to judge his actions while denying him the right to explain them. Meghan chose to remain outside. She understood how quickly her presence could change the argument. Instead of discussing the altered instructions, officials might focus on her tone, her reactions, or the old accusations attached to her name. So, Harry entered alone, carrying every hidden exclusion she had endured that day. He revealed the changed arrival time, the missing reception invitation, the altered name card, and the order preventing Meghan from approaching senior royals. The advisor defended each decision as necessary to protect the monarchy's boundaries. But Anne placed the unsigned amendment before the room and demanded the one answer no one wanted to give. Had the sovereign personally approved the instruction to ignore Meghan? The courtier finally admitted that only a general approach had been authorized. The exact wording may never have been shown to the monarch. That confession shattered the palace's strongest defense. Royal authority had been used to enforce an order the sovereign may never have seen. William called it what it was: deliberate protection through uncertainty. The household could benefit from Meghan's exclusion while ensuring no senior royal appeared directly responsible. The advisor was removed from future ceremonial planning while the decision was reviewed. The amendment was withdrawn, but the palace refused to offer a public explanation. Harry rejected the idea that a private correction could erase a public humiliation. Anne later warned him that the institution would always protect its image before admitting cruelty. Meghan, however, told Harry that his intervention had already changed something important. He had refused to let the palace decide her value through a missing greeting, a secret document, or a carefully controlled silence. The family returned to duty, and the public appearance of unity survived. But beneath it, the fracture remained. Anne's silence had begun as obedience. Harry's intervention had become resistance. And Meghan's confession had exposed how easily tradition could be turned into a weapon. Worse still, the hidden amendment was said to be only one of several confidential documents created to decide who could be recognized, who would be controlled, and who could quietly be erased. The procession lasted only minutes, but the silence inside it revealed something the palace could never fully hide. In the royal family, the most dangerous battles are not fought over crowns, they are fought over who is permitted to belong. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors.